Ladies and gentlemen, can I welcome you all to today's meeting of the Public Petitions Committee. And as always, can I ask you all, both members and those in the gallery, to switch off any mobile phones or electronic equipment, because it does interfere with our sound systems. Apologies have been received from Angus MacDonald, and Jim Eadie is in attendance, a substitute. Good morning, Mr Eadie. I'm glad you could join us this morning. So agenda item 1 is consideration of new petitions. The first item of business is a consideration of 2 new petitions, and as previously agreed, the committee will take evidence from the petitioners in each case. The first petition is PE 1505 by Jackie Watt on awareness of strep B in pregnancy and infants. Members have a note by the clerk and the spice briefing and the petition. Could I welcome the petitioner, Jackie Watt, and also Jane Plum, who is the Chief Executive of Group B Strep Support, to the meeting. Can I invite Ms Watt to make a short presentation of around 5 minutes to set the context of the petition, after which we'll move to questions. Jackie Watt.
This petition is personal to me, as I lost my granddaughter at 20 days from the late onset of strep B infection. At the time she passed, my daughter was told that if there was 1,000 pregnant women in Glasgow, about 800 would be carrying it at the time of birth, and it was just your luck if your baby contracted it. None of us knew what strep B was, so after researching myself and getting information from different sources, I found out it's a bacteria that is present in the vagina of about 1 in 4 women, not 8 out of 10 women, as Nicole was told. And some babies get it and others don't. But if women were tested between 35 and 37 weeks of pregnancy with a reliable test, then the result is good at predicting whether the mum is carrying strep B when she gives birth. If she is, she can be given antibiotics in labour, and that reduces the risk of the baby getting Group B strep infection dramatically. I think information about Group B strep should be given to all pregnant women as routine part of their antenatal care. I understand that the standard swab test used by the National Health Service will miss out 2 of every 5 carriers. I think every pregnant woman should have the opportunity to have the reliable test for strep B carriage. The strep B proper test should be available from the National Health in Scotland. Until it is, pregnant women should be given advice on how to get it done privately. Currently in Scotland, there is no information given to expectant mums, and also no Scottish support group to provide people with the relevant information. That's me finished.
Thank you very much for making your statement to us. Can I also say to Jim Plum, please feel to ask any questions that you want, or add any comments, just if you just catch my eye. I've got a couple of questions, then I'll move over to ask my colleagues. Reading the background to this, to your very interesting petition, I note that the UK Screening Committee has ruled against introduction of routine screening for GBS. What's your own views on that?
We were very disappointed in that decision back in 2012. Because the evidence quite clearly shows that if you screen women, as Jackie said, late in pregnancy, and then offer antibiotics in labour to women carrying Group B strep, it is hugely effective at reducing the incidence of Group B strep infections in babies. As we can see from what other countries have done. Research has shown quite clearly that countries that have done that and have done a snapshot of before and after introducing screening, the incidence has absolutely plummeted, ranging from about 71% in France through to about 86% reduction in Spain and the US. So we were hugely disappointed, as were a lot of other people. The National Screening Committee got over 200 comments on as part of their consultation process. Significantly over 90% of those were in favour of screening. So it's not just Group B strep support's disappointed. There are a lot of people that are disappointed. And from a Scottish perspective, of course, you're not bound by what the UK National Screening Committee decides for the UK. And looking at the data that's been published so far, it does appear that the rate of infection in Scotland is higher than it is elsewhere in the rest of the UK. And on top of that, the incidence has increased since there was a study done in 2000. The incidence has more than doubled in Scotland. So I think that there's a real argument for examining the data from a Scottish perspective and making a decision based on the population here.
I think that's a very good answer. You've actually predicted my next question. I was actually going to say that very point, that the Scottish Government, of course, isn't bound by UK Screening Committee. Although I would say, in fairness, successive governments have taken on board UK Screening Committee's expertise, and they obviously have Scottish representation. I think, on memory, they have at least 3 members from Scotland who form part of the UK Screening Committee. But they say that there's insufficient evidence of benefits. Do you think then that that's a call for having further, more in-depth studies rather than the fact that screening itself is not going to work?
I think that, unfortunately, the National Screening Committee has looked at data from other countries and feels it's not the best possible evidence. The National Screening Committee, as I'm sure you know, likes randomised controlled trials. But I think it's quite clear that the opportunity to do randomised controlled trials now, that opportunity has effectively been lost because there is so much evidence that screening works. And I think whilst more evidence would be great, we can wait forever for perfect evidence, and we're not going to get there. There is already evidence from other countries that it does work, and quite probably the way forward in terms of better evidence is introducing maybe a pilot study and saying let's do this and see the effect that has.
Thank you for that. Can I bring in Jim Meady and then Jackson Carlow?
Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses, particularly Ms Watt, for her personal testimony this morning. Can I just ask, what are the number of countries that currently have adopted screening? You mentioned some of them: Spain, France, the United States. How many across the world adopt screening?
19 developed countries, okay. Clearly.
And clearly there is no price that can be put on the health of women and babies. But do you have have you done any work to suggest what the cost of introducing this in Scotland or the UK would be?
No, I haven't. I haven't looked at how much it would cost to introduce. There have been cost-benefit analyses done for the UK, and all of them have come out and said that the cost, that it would be more cost-effective to screen than to use the risk-based approach. And I gave some packs. I don't. Yes, yeah, you got. Okay, and I 2 of the research papers that are in that pack by Campbell and Colburn are actually those cost-benefit analyses.
In terms of costing the proposal, is that something you would consider undertaking to do some work on or to commission some work on?
I think it would be very useful to look at the situation in Scotland, because both of those studies looked at the estimated UK incidence rather than the higher incidence that seems to be here. Yeah.
For bringing Jackson and Carlow and then Chick Fury. I mean, would it be competent for an individual Scottish university to pick up this research work, particularly if it got research funding, to explore this in a bit more detail in a Scottish context?
I don't know enough about the Scottish universities' research programmes to be able to be competent to answer that question.
Thank you. Jackson Carlow.
Morning. Can I come back to the convener's earlier point about the National Screening Committee? And I note from the briefing we've received, the various countries around the world and the improvement there has been as a result of the screening there. What the National Screening Committee's thing said is there is insufficient evidence to demonstrate that the benefits to be gained from screening all pregnant women and treating those carrying the organism with intravenous antibiotics during labour would outweigh the harms. Now, I haven't been briefed as to what the harms might be, and I wonder if, in exploring or responding to the National Screening Committee's position, you have been able to establish what the anticipated harms might be, or whether that is something of a mystery or what you understand arising from that.
I think yes. I mean, certainly it's something that the National Screening Committee set out in their huge report on it. And there are very real concerns about antibiotic resistance developing, about there being major allergic reactions to the antibiotics in labour amongst pregnant women. And there are concerns that giving antibiotics in that during labour may have long-term impact on babies themselves. Having said all of that, those seem to be the key concerns, plus the concern about medicalising labour. I mean, in terms of medicalising labour, I kind of think a healthy baby outweighs whether or not you're medicalising labour. That's a personal view. The antibiotic resistance issue, actually the drug of choice is penicillin. So it's a drug that is not resistant to group B strep or pretty much anything else. It's got a very good track record. And the concerns about anaphylaxis and major allergic reactions, I know that there is some research that's going on at the moment trying to establish that specifically for group B strep. And there have been cases where mums have had major allergic reactions as a result of antibiotics being given for caesarean sections. But those are different antibiotics, and you can't necessarily say, well, because that's happening here, it's going to happen there. So the evidence from other countries, the evidence from other countries is that the benefit outweighs the risk.
That's helpful. So, I mean, presumably the incidence or prevalence of the potential harms you've just identified will have manifested themselves in the 19 countries who are undertaking the screening and proactive intervention ahead of birth. Do you know what the kind of instance or prevalence has proved to be?
There is very little data published on that, which kind of makes one assume that actually it must be very, very small, because there just aren't the research papers published. So
is it your summation then that the expectation that there could be potential harms is an unquantified assertion, not necessarily drawn from the experience of the countries where screening is now being offered, as opposed to a concern arising born out of the facts of the availability of treatment in those countries?
Yes, I think there has been conflation of risks appearing as a result of antibiotics given for other reasons, antibiotics given long-term during pregnancy, where there are greater concerns about antibiotic resistance, and rather than focusing on the short, sharp doses of antibiotics, typically penicillin, given in labour for a specific purpose of preventing group B strep infections. So I think there's been a sort of, this is what has happened in other areas with other antibiotics given in different ways and different durations. And I haven't seen any research that shows that these are also true for the specific intervention we're talking about.
Thank you.
Check Brody.
Thank you. Good morning. I wonder if I may just ask a question about the risk assessment involved. What I don't understand, looking at the information that's been provided, is how, in the current situation where there is no total screening, how one determines those that should be screened and those that shouldn't be screened. How is that determined?
The National Screening Committee, the UK National Screening Committee, is obviously the body that sets whether there's screening or not. And in the absence of any screening programme, then it is a question of individual clinicians making an assessment for a specific pregnant woman and deciding whether or not, in that clinician's professional judgment, they would wish to test.
Just stop you on that.
Sure.
In terms of professional judgment, what routine do they go through, do the clinicians go through to say, yes, you will be screened and you won't be? Can you help me on that?
There are no guidelines written in, that I'm aware of in the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists Group B strap guideline that recommends a situation in which a woman should be tested, as opposed to screened. It says in there that all pregnant women shouldn't be routinely screened for Group B strap, but it doesn't define any situations when a woman should be tested. Quite possibly because in 2003, when that guideline was first written, and then in 2012 when it was updated, the standard test that would be used if you were going to try and identify Group B strep is recognised as not being good for the, for that specific purpose.
Can I just a couple of very short questions in the presentation which you provided with us? It says the current strategy of risk factor based screening is not cost effective compared with screening based on culture. Can you expand on what that means?
The current recommendations in the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists is that clinicians should use a risk-based strategy. So if certain situations arise during pregnancy, during labour and delivery, then that should prompt the health professional to offer the mum antibiotics in labour. So that's the risk-based strategy. The culture strategy is where you would test women late in pregnancy using a Group B strep specific test, and then based on the result of that, the ECM test, perfect. And based on the result of that, you would offer mum antibiotics in labour. And there's plenty of research that shows, including UK research, that many babies who develop Group B strep infection actually don't have any recognised risk factors when they're born. So the risk-based strategy is never going to identify those. It's only ever, the antibiotics are only ever going to be good at minimising the risk to the babies where there is one or more of the risk factors.
In the papers that were provided with, and talk about the enrichment broth, the ECM test, it said the ECM test is currently not widely available at NHS hospitals, but may be purchased privately by post for a fee of approximately £35. Is that that's the cost of the test?
The private laboratories that offer a postal service for the ECM test, that's what they charge for the whole thing. Mum phones up or emails and asks for a Group B strap test. The only test that they do, or the organisations that are listed on the charity's website, we're very careful. We make sure that they only do the right test. So that the mum phones up, gets the test sent, she sends back her payment with her swabs, and the payment is around £35. Absolutely correct.
John Wilson.
Convener, thank you. Good morning. As a follow-up to that question, the last question from Chick Brodie, is the issue about privately screening and paying for it. The issue for me is, given if an expectant mother does go through that process, pays the £35, gets the result, and then presents that to her midwife or GP, how responsive are the NHS to those results? Because there's an issue here. If the guidelines say there shouldn't be universal screening, yet individuals can go and get an individual screening and pay £35 and then present that to the hospital where they're being treated, does that hospital then take on board the results of that screening test? Or do they apply the standard recommendations that are coming out at the present moment to say, well, that's fine, you've had that test carried out, but as practice, our practice in this hospital is that we don't do any follow-up work on that issue?
Clearly, different hospitals may well have different policies. The recommendations, both from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists and from the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, sorry, that's not their latest title, I've forgotten it, but nice. Both of them say that where Group B strep has been detected during the current pregnancy, then mum should be offered antibiotics in labour.
That's where it's been detected, but in relation to the private route we were talking about in terms of paying the £35, do they accept that private testing as a standard that allows them to then go and carry out further treatment in terms of antibiotics?
What we're hearing at the charity is the vast majority do, because the existing guidelines don't say where Group B strep has been found from an NHS test. It is just where Group B strep has been detected in the current pregnancy from a vaginal swab or a urine sample or wherever.
It tends to, to my mind, tends to fly in the face of what you're requesting in terms of your petition, because if the recommendations, national recommendations are there shouldn't be a standard across-the-board test for pregnant mothers, then clearly if they then accept anybody that comes back with the test results of the privately ECM test, then that clearly shows that there is a need for that. The other question I have is that we have what's defined within the paperwork as high risk, low risk pregnant mothers. How do we define high risk and low risk in these circumstances? Is there a definition of high risk and low risk?
There are the risk factors are usually defined. If one or more of the risk factors is present, that's usually defined as as high. I prefer to say higher risk than high risk, but that's usually it. And low risk is where none of those risk factors is present. And actually, I totally agree. What you've highlighted also is an illogicality within the current Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists guidelines, because they're saying don't routinely screen all pregnant women, but they're also saying if it's found, act on it.
Well, it's not a case of it's not a case of it's found. If someone then comes along with evidence to say that it's there, then it's treated, and it's the private route. Whereas what I'm trying to look at and here is that if we don't have routine testing, then it means that only those who are, one, aware that the test can be done privately, and two, can afford to pay for the test, are likely to receive the necessary treatment from the NHS to actually combat any risk at all.
There will be some pregnant women that Group B strep will be detected for if these sort of general non-specific swab tests are done. Although they're not very reliable in terms that they will miss a lot of carriers, they will find about half of them. So when, and clearly the issue with that is not the half of the women that they find are carrying Group B strep. It's the half of the women who are carrying Group B strep and told, no, there's nothing to worry about. But I totally take your point, it is inequitable.
The other issue then arises is the testing that's being carried out by NHS. Is it sufficient? Because if you're saying the ECM test that's been carried out privately by the organisations recommended on your website are accurate, or potentially more accurate than the tests conducted by the NHS, would it not be proportionate to say that the test there should be a standardised testing method to ensure that no one, and you indicated something like 50%, up to 50% of those tested in the NHS are told that there is no problem. In reality, there is potentially a problem there.
Yes, and that there does exist what used to be the Health Protection Agency and is now Public Health England has a UK, it's an SMI, Standard for Microbiological Investigations, and there's one, the SMI B58 is in your packs, which describes the right method that if you're going to be looking for Group B strep, this is, and it is the ECM method. And I still find it surprising that those guidelines were put together in 2006, and I still find it surprising that only a handful of NHS trusts make that test available to their health professionals to request.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Can I just, unfortunately we are a bit short of time, but just ask you some advice on perhaps next steps, because it's quite a technical area. Do you feel there is any further mileage that this committee can helpfully deal with as far as the UK Screening Committee is concerned? I mean, for example, would it be worth us meeting with the Screening Committee to raise these points directly with them?
I think that I think conversations are always useful. I think that the next time that the National Screening Committee will be reviewing their recommendations for the UK as a whole will be 2015-16, and maybe that's the time to have that direct conversation.
And would it also be then useful for us to perhaps write to the Scottish Government to ensure the information is given out routinely to expectant mothers, if that's not already been given out? What's your perception in Scotland? And maybe Jackie Watt's more familiar with that. Do you feel there is enough information given to expectant mothers in Scotland?
It's very hard to find information.
Right.
And when we went to speak with the paediatric doctors and consultants that had cared for my granddaughter, he didn't have any information or any handouts or anything that he could give us. And just lately, he printed something off Jane's website and sent it to us, so I feel as if there's nothing out there, there's no surgeries at the maternity units, there's nothing making you aware of Strep B, no leaflets, no signs, symptoms.
So then it does seem there is a gap here that perhaps we could usefully, if the committee agree, write to Scottish Government to try and raise awareness so that expectant mothers are given more information. Would that be a useful course of action?
I think writing to the Scottish Government would be great. We've written recently and we've had a couple of responses which I printed off copies, if I may share them with you, so that maybe the questions...
If you could perhaps leave them, that would be very helpful.
Yep.
Right.
But in terms of asking the Scottish Government about information, there is a little bit of information in a booklet that's given to all pregnant women. But actually there needs to be some sort of proactive information given. And if you're giving information, what are you doing? Are you saying, are you going to say, if you want to be tested for this, the only route is private? Or are you going to be saying that actually if you are to be tested for this, then within Scotland we are going to be making sure that you are offered the right test, the proper test for the job. And I think there would also be mileage in perhaps asking the Scottish Government to review the situation on screening specifically for the Scottish population.
Well, the next step is that the committee then goes into summation mode, where basically we stop questions and we decide on the next steps. But I think you both have given us some very helpful signposts to what the next step should be, because obviously this is a technical piece of work, but obviously one that has terrible outcomes, as Jackie Watt graphically described sort of earlier on. Well, certainly my thought... Sorry, Chip, do you want to come in first? Yeah, I was just going to suggest, certainly take on board what Jane Plum and Jackie Watt suggested. I think certainly we need to write to Scottish Government flagging this area up and seeing whether better information can be given to expectant mothers. I also take the point in Screening Committee that 15-16 is going to be a crucial period. So if we were going to have a conversation with them, either by some form of e-conferencing or face-to-face, presumably the end of this year would be a useful time before they start their programme for next year. Again, my thoughts to the committee may be that either by telephone conference or video conference or in person, we could meet a representative from the Screening Committee perhaps at the end of this year, which fits in nicely for their programme of 15-16. Chuck Brodie? Yeah.
Well, I agree in general with that, but I happen to agree with the last comment that Jane Plum made in terms of having conversations. No bad idea, always helpful, but in terms of the numbers that we're talking about, and I suspect the costs that we might ask in our letter that the Scottish Government seriously consider application of screening to all those that are pregnant.
Sure, and that perhaps would need some more Scottish-specific research. Jackson Carla?
I would like to write to the National Screening Committee to pursue this issue about the potential harms that they identified, and to ask whether, in fact, they have quantified these in any meaningful sense. And unusually, and I hope this is in order, I would like to write to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists who introduced advice in 1996, or to the Centre for Disease Control in the United States, because they have been applying the policy now for a period that would be long enough for the harms that were identified in evidence to us to have manifested themselves in a quantifiable way. And I think it would be useful for us to have that information, if only to use to some effect potentially at a later stage were we to be meeting with the National Screening Committee to discuss these matters further.
That's a very good bits of advice. Can I ask other members their view? John Wilson?
I would agree we should write to the Scottish Government. I'm looking at some of the figures here, and in relation to their UK figures, we don't have a breakdown, I assume, for Scotland's specific figures.
In the package.
And we only received the pack just before the Parliament meeting, so we haven't had a chance to read through them.
The incidence in Scotland for 2012 of the early onset cases, which are the ones that are mostly preventable, potentially preventable, is 0.47 cases per 1,000 live births. For England, Wales and Northern Ireland combined for 2012, it's 0.36.
So the incidence in Scotland is higher than the rest of the UK.
And there was and that is voluntarily reported. It's not a notifiable disease, so that's voluntarily reported data. There was an enhanced surveillance study that was done back in 2000-2001, and at that point the rate per 1,000 live births was 0.21 in Scotland. So it's more than doubled, or the data has more than doubled in that period.
As I was saying, I think it would be worthwhile writing to the Scottish Government to try and get, the figures that Ms Plum has provided are useful, but given it's a non-reportable situation, it might be useful to ask the Scottish Government whether or not it would consider making it a reportable incident so that we can actually get accurate figures. The other issue, Convener, I would like to raise is to ask the Scottish Government whether or not they would consider where a expectant mother requests the test be carried out, as to what the position would be on that issue, because while I accept expectant mothers can pay the £35 and get the test done privately, not every expectant mother is in that situation and is not aware of the availability of that test. So it would be useful to find out if the Scottish Government would consider a policy change to ensure that every woman who requested that test be carried out have the opportunity to have that test carried out.
Thank you for that. David Torrance?
I'm happy to write to Scottish Government and at the National Screening Committee, give evidence at the end of the year, because I think that's vitally important.
Thank you for that. Jim Eadie?
I fully endorse and support the constructive suggestions that have been made by other members.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Thank the members for that. I think that's some very constructive points that we can take this issue forward. And can I thank both our witnesses today, our petitioner, Jackie Watt and Jane Plum. As you can see, we're going to actively pursue your petition in every single way that we can, and obviously we'll keep you up to date with developments. And if you have further information, perhaps you can leave it with the clerks. And I'll suspend the meeting for 2 minutes to allow our witnesses to change round. Thank you very much. If I could restart our committee, we're on our second current petition, which is PE 1508 by Sean Clerkin on Atos as a sponsor for the 2014 Commonwealth Games. Members have a note by the clerk, the spice briefing and the petition. Could I welcome our petitioner? Good morning, Mr Clerkin. I'm glad you've come along today. And Ian McInnes, who's the Secretary of Glasgow Against Atos, to the meeting. Before inviting Mr Clerkin to speak for around 5 minutes, could I just clarify for the record that the petition obviously raises a matter of legitimate public debate. However, as convener, one of my duties will be to ensure that today's evidence session does not stray into irrelevant matters, and this committee is not used as a forum for making gratuitous remarks. That would be judgment for me, and I would ask all round the table to conduct discussions in an appropriate way and to ensure that discussion centres around the subject matter of the petition and does not stray into issues that are not directly relevant to the petition. And can I now invite Mr Clerk to make a short presentation of around 5 minutes.
Mr Chairman. Essentially, we are here today to state the facts that 600,000 disabled and sick people in Britain and 60,000 disabled and sick people in Scotland have had their sickness and disability benefits taken off them by Atos through the operation of the Work Capability Assessment. In addition, 2,200 people have actually died going through the Atos-administered assessment process. The fact of the matter is these people have either committed suicide, having lost their benefits, or people who were terminally ill and past fit to work who died before going back to work. We speak for these victims today. People like David Barr, who committed suicide, threw himself off the Forth Road Bridge, Eleanor Tatton, who essentially died of a brain tumour 5 weeks after she was past fit to work, Edward Jakes, Jacqueline Harris and Ian Hodges. And above all, may I say, one of the worst cases I have seen was the case of Mark Wood. Mark Wood lived, I should say, in David Cameron's constituency down in Oxford. He was found dead by the police, weighing 5 stone. He'd starved to death. He'd been taken off his benefits by Atos last year, and he starved to death. And basically, it was found he weighed 5 stones exactly on his death. That's what they found. The fact of the matter is that we believe that Atos are contract killers. Atos have profiteered from the misery and suffering of the most poor and vulnerable members of our society. They've not paid a single penny in corporation tax. Truly, we believe that Atos, setting the scene for this, that Atos have been financial rapists, financially raping the poor and the vulnerable. That's what they've done. They're going to denigrate our Commonwealth Games if they're allowed to be a sponsor, because they are a toxic brand for many people in Scotland. Can I then, the people, can I just finish my presentation?
Can I just interrupt? Sorry, Mr Clerkin.
Yes.
I mean, obviously we understand the strength of your views on this issue, but you recall my comments at the start. Can we just be conscious of sort of the use of language in the debate?
Okay, I understand that.
Thank you.
The people of Scotland people of Scotland prize their social-democratic beliefs of fairness and social justice. And public opinion in Scotland is appalled at the fact of what Atos have been doing to people. And they are certainly not in favour of Atos being a sponsor of the Commonwealth Games. That's been shown, public opinion on these issues, by the Daily Record, who have ran a campaign on Atos and the harm that they've done to people and the lives they've ruined. They've chronicled it no end over the last 2 years. So what we are saying is that Scottish public opinion is clearly saying to us that Atos should be dropped as a sponsor for the Commonwealth Games so that they don't profiteer from what they've done, because they're going in front of an audience of 1.2 billion people at the Commonwealth Games, and they think that they can profiteer from that. And I don't think it's right or fair that they are allowed to do that, given the harm and the terrible things they've done to the poorest and most vulnerable members of our society. In conclusion, what I'm saying is that they are a toxic brand. They are, and I do repeat the word, they are, as many people have stated in Parliament and elsewhere, they are contract killers. and they are corporate criminals. And as far as we are concerned, they're not fit to grace our Commonwealth Games, and we, the moral conscience of Scotland, demand that our elected representatives do the right thing, that this committee goes forward and urges the Scottish Parliament to contact the organising committee to get Atos dropped as a sponsor for the Commonwealth Games, because they're not fit to grace our Commonwealth Games, because they'll forever tarnish the Commonwealth Games if they're allowed to be a sponsor.
Thank you, Mr Clarkin. I would also encourage Mr McInnes, if you wish to come in, just catch my eye during our question and answer session. I suppose a couple of introductory remarks, Mr Clarkin, before I invite my colleagues to come in. Clearly, I would pick up a sort of consensus on one issue, which is that I think across Scotland there's widespread support for having Glasgow 14. It was a great victory getting Commonwealth Games to Glasgow and indeed for the whole of Scotland. The second point, and this, some of the press reports I've picked up from government ministers and others have made the point that whilst not condoning in any way the issue of welfare reforms that you've pointed out earlier, that the work that Atos is doing for DWP is completely separate to the work that's being carried out if they are a sponsor in the 2014 Games. What would your response to that comment be?
Atos are basically in a £500 million contract with the Westminster Government, as you rightly say, but it is clearly linked. They are an entity and they're profiteering on the misery and the suffering of hundreds of thousands of people across the UK, and you cannot divorce the Commonwealth Games from this company and what they have done, what they've carried out. It's morally wrong that they be a sponsor. They're an entity that is basically profiteers, as I say, from the misery of hundreds of thousands of people. We're speaking on their behalf today, and we're saying they are not fit to grace the Commonwealth Games because they'll tarnish the Commonwealth Games' reputation because of the reputation that goes before them.
McInnes?
Am I switched on here?
Sure, it's automatic, just if you just speak, yes.
Well, could I just further develop the point that has just been made by saying that Atos Healthcare, Atos IT, they're all part of the same group. And in regard to the healthcare aspect, in relation to this question of assessment, work capability assessments, that is not done in any way, shape or form in a way that could be regarded as healthcare. Disability groups and their champions have for decades campaigned to be part of the workforce, to be seen as fully part of society with their particular barriers taken into account so that these barriers ceased as far as possible to exist. And in other ways we've seen attempts to deal with this. We have the Paralympics, for example, and the Winter Paralympics, which have just completed at the moment. But what do we see with Atos Healthcare and its relationship with DWP? Well, what we see there is an arithmetic formula, not attention to healthcare or assistance to people with recent healthcare difficulties or who have particular disabilities to be assisted towards work or some sort of work programme that would lead to a real job at a later stage. That is not what was happening here. That is not what David Freud was contracted to do when he was contracted by a previous Labour government before being employed by the current coalition government. He was contracted to cut the numbers. And an arithmetic formula would cut the numbers. And therefore, it's quite obvious, backing up what my colleague has just said, that they are not separate. IT companies work with numbers. This so-called healthcare arm of the organisation is still working with numbers. Numbers only, not healthcare. And with further evidence can be produced to back that up.
With that, I'll try and allow as much time as I can to allow my other colleagues to come in. Can I throw on to questions from my colleagues? John Wilson.
No questions at the present moment.
Thank you. Jackson Carlow. Right. David Torrance. Chip Brodie.
No questions.
Right. I think clearly as you probably picked up in the previous petition that we had, our job then is to make sure then that we seek information from as many organisations that have a role in the locus. Clearly, the first one, the obvious one, would be the Glasgow 2014 Organising Committee. Obviously, the Scottish Government, the STUC, which has had a track record, as you know, on this particular issue, Glasgow City Council, Scottish Disability Sport and ATOS itself. I think certainly these would seem to me to be the obvious next steps for us. Can I just ask the committee's approval for that? Jackson Carlo?
I would ask that we write to the DWP as well.
Okay. So, Mr McInnes?
Yes, that is that there are a plethora of small, medium-sized and large organisations supporting people with disabilities and people with health problems who have shown their opposition to ATOS and its activities, and basically to the policy that ATOS are the front people for. And I think we are indebted to these people, and I think that should be noted for the record. And I just wanted to mention that, and also to say that if required, we would be happy to provide an information pack citing some of these people and giving more written evidence if you require it.
Certainly, Mr McInnes, if you have further information, again, if you could give that to the clerks, the more information we have on this petition, any other petitions, very helpful indeed. I did also flag up that we were going to write to Scottish Disability Sport, which should hopefully pick up some of the issues that you're...
Could I just say that why we put the petition in is because the fact is that we would like the Petitions Committee to actually take forward to take to the Scottish Parliament to call on the Organising Committee for ATOS to step down as a sponsor of the Commonwealth Games. That's why we're here today, and that's what we're calling upon. And the fact of the matter is, these hundreds of thousands of people that have suffered, it cannot be divorced from ATOS that's at the Commonwealth Games, and the issue is clearly linked. The STUC, who you quoted, the Scottish Trade Union Congress, voted last year to have ATOS dropped out, to be dropped as a sponsor from the Commonwealth Games. There's a whole host of organisations that have voted for ATOS to be stood down as a sponsor for the Commonwealth Games, and that includes the STUC, amongst many other trade unions and organisations. And I find it slightly disappointing that some of our MSPs this morning have deemed not to ask any questions or to make any points with regard to this petition. I find that very disappointing.
Well, just to be clear on the next steps, what our normal course of events is we would write to an organisation asking for their advice. Obviously, the Scottish Government is a traditional one because it tends to be around issues that are devolved. So our next steps is to write to all these organisations, and our question will be, what are your views on the nature of this petition? What are your views on the petition that you've lodged today? And that's our normal course of action on petitions. So, you know, we're taking this petition forward, we're raising it with these organisations, so the petition will be continued, and obviously once we get feedback from these organisations, we will keep you actively involved with what the results of that feedback is, because that's what a petition's about. And we appreciate the fact that you're able to come along today and put your strong views to it. There's nothing wrong with having strong views. I think you have made your views very strongly and very clear today. So that's my recommendation, that we write to all these organisations. Can I ask John Wilson your views?
Thank you, Convener. And I'm not going to respond to Mr Clarkin's comment there about what MSPs should and shouldn't do in relation to petitions. But could I suggest we write to Sport Scotland as well? Because I think there is a wider issue here. And I know Mr Clarkin has raised the issue of ATOS sponsorship, but I think it's a much wider issue, and that is about private companies sponsoring sporting events. And I know that the ATOS issue is particularly relevant in relation to the work that they are doing on behalf of the DWP in relation to work assessments for individuals. But I think there is a much wider issue here in terms of the issue of sponsorship of sporting events, but taking on board that the major sporting event later this year is the Commonwealth Games. I think it is only but right, when we write to organisations that have been named today, that we get responses from them before the petition then can take it forward. But I think in the first instance, by writing to those organisations, allows us to get their responses, their views, and for us to make a determined decision beyond that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are committee members agreeable in that course of events that I have described in terms of various organisations we've dragged to? Yeah. Right. Thank you for that. So as you can hear, Mr Clarkin and Mr McInnes, we are taking your petition forward. We're writing to a whole series of organisations. Just on the issue for DWP, we'll be writing to them about, obviously this is focused particularly about the Commonwealth Games, which is not a locus for DWP, but we'll be asking them what their views in this petition are. I think that is relevant. I think comes Jackson Carlin's point. Yes, can I just hear Mr.
Yes, and also I would have thought their comment on some of the evidence we've heard, because obviously a number of figures were asserted, which obviously the DWP would have a view and be able to comment upon.
So I think what Mr Carroll is suggesting is not just the petition, but we will send a copy of the official record to ask for any comments of the points that have been made during that. Mr Wilson? Right. Thank you. So just to summarise then, we are continuing your petition. We will actively keep you up to date. We will write to all these organisations, and when we've got feedback, we'll look at this petition again in the future. And clearly, you'll be welcome to be in the gallery at that stage, both Mr Clarkin and Mr McInnes. I can thank you both for coming along and for putting your comments. Very quickly, because I'm a bit short of time.
Just to say that there is a sort of Kafkaesque situation whereby we are sitting here and not the people who are most directly affected, because these people are living in fear of losing the small amount of money that they have to live on. And therefore they are very often, they will give the likes of us information and say, don't use my name.
And I do appreciate that you're saying it's for information. Some of it will be anonymised, and I appreciate that as well. And can I thank both of you for coming along and your colleagues in the gallery today, and I'll suspend for 1 minute to allow our witnesses to leave. Thank you both. Can we move to agenda item 2, consideration of current petitions. The next item of business is consideration of 4 current petitions. The first current petition is PE 1488 by Pete Gregson on behalf of Kids Not Suits on whistleblowing in local government. Members have a note by the clerk and the submissions. Can I first of all invite questions, comments or views from members?
Yeah, can I just
check, Drury?
Based on a substantive petition, and clearly what we're trying to do is to open the windows and let some fresh air in terms of practices. I made a point in another place about the need for management training. Just made a change on the settlement agreements, but I do think that the recommendations are appropriate until we so I say, open up all public bodies to full scrutiny in terms of the actions that are taken.
John Wilson, did you wish to come in?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I think relating to some of the responses we've received, I think the response from Audit Scotland quite clearly says that, however, Audit Scotland would recommend that all councils comply with guidance and ensure that robust whistleblowing arrangements are in place. But what they don't outline is what powers are in place if the councils do not comply with the guidance. And guidance is only guidance. And clearly the petitioner has raised an issue about what happens when somebody does raise a whistleblowing issue. and then is dealt with, or is seen to be dealt with unfairly by that employer. So it's really about what kind of powers are there in place to ensure that we have the guidance being uniformly applied throughout Scotland. So there are issues there, Convener, in relation to how we take this forward, because it clearly, as we know from other petitions that are before us at the present time, people are afraid to come forward because of the actions that may be taken by employers. And I think Unison have quite clearly outlined in their response they actually state the very limited protection in the legislation for individuals who are involved in providing information that would be deemed as whistleblowing clearly indicates that there are wider concerns out there if staff feel they are unable to or unwilling to come forward with issues because of the lack of legal support that may be available for them if an employer decides to take action against them.
I think it was an interesting point that John Wilson made about Unison, and just to clear my interest as a member of Unison, I think Dave Watson made quite an interesting point about the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which said brings in a public interest test, and I think Mr Watson was concerned about that would have further legal uncertainty and discourage whistleblowing. John Wilson?
I was going to go on to say further that in terms of COSLA response and the Glasgow City Council response, I think the almost identical phrase has been used in both responses, that the policy and practice in this area is a matter for local determination by local elected politicians. Now, as one or two other members of this committee have been a local elected member, and I am unaware of local elected members being involved in the day-to-day management of staff. In fact, the advice that I received regularly from senior officers within the local authority I served on was that the day-to-day management of staff is up to the managers, not up to politicians. Politicians are responsible for overseeing the policy, but we're not involved in the day-to-day management. And where I had approaches by individual members of staff about issues, I was advised that there was a procedure for dealing with that via their line managers rather than dealing with elected members. So there is an issue here in terms of COSLA and Glasgow City Council almost saying the same thing in relation to the accountability and the relevance of local elected members in the decision-making structures. So I think I would clearly want to write back to Glasgow City Council and COSLA and seek clarification from them as to at what stage do elected members become engaged in the whistleblowing process, because my understanding is in any individual employment dispute, then it's through the line manager, and elected members are not line managers per se in terms of employment legislation when it comes to staff and whistleblowing.
Chip Brodie.
Thank you. Sorry, just to come back on when John Wilson mentioned some of the correspondence we had. I get very concerned, and John's absolutely right. Our role is to set policy, and clearly the bodies that are involved, local authorities, for example, are there to carry out the policies and achieve the outcomes that are agreed. Somewhat concerned by the Public Service Ombudsman letter that says our lack of direct experience in this area, and I know one suggests that they get involved in the legalities of settlement agreements and what have you, but if they don't have experience, then they should hurry up and get some, because they're part of the landscape of public service and should at least have an understanding of what is going on. I think the other point that John Wilson made in terms of Audit Scotland guidance, it does not go as far as recommending specific arrangements on processes. Well, I think if the policy is there, then we have to ensure and secure a means whereby there is at least some form of consistency in terms of the processes which will secure the interests and diminish, if not eliminate, the problems that encourage the need for whistleblowing, or at least eliminate the fear for somebody whistleblowing. This, this has come up in the health service, and I think major steps have been taken there. I know that the Minister said that the local authorities, in his letter, says are expected to have in place appropriate policies. Well, they should not be expected to have policies in place. They should have policies in place, because this, if we are to secure the kind of society and openness of government that we wish, these scenarios are, frankly, wholly unacceptable.
Thank you for that. Other colleagues wish to comment? There is a certain suggestion that we write to the Accounts Commission and Audit Scotland to ask what scrutiny they undertake of whistleblowing policies introduced by local authorities. I think John Wilson had a point about writing to COSLA and the City of Glasgow.
To seek clarification on the policies where elected members become involved in the whistleblowing. And
in addition, I was following some correspondence around the Whistleblowing Commission, and I think the chairman of that, Sir Anthony Hooper, has been, I think they've just reported on some work they've been doing. Would members be agreeable that we write to these various organisations in the terms that suggested earlier? Is that agreed? Thank you very much for that. Check,
Perhaps John Wilson can clarify why we're just talking about Glasgow District Council. I have a tendency to ask every council to comment on what their actual policy, what their processes are for encouraging the elimination or securing the elimination of the need for whistleblowing.
Okay, is that agreeable? No. Thank you. Authority. Yeah. Can we move to the next current petition? It's PE 1498 by Colin Emerson on behalf of the Edinburgh Secular Society on religious representation. Religious representatives on local authority education committees, member of a note by the clerk, and submissions. Before I invite contributions from members, I understand that the convener of the Education and Culture Committee is keen to consider this petition along with PE 1487. I can ask committee members' view on this. Normally, obviously, we try and deal with petitions to the end of the road, but clearly if another committee is already considering that, normally what we've done is allowed that petition to be referred to another committee. Can I seek members' views on that? Okay. Are our members all in agreement? Thank you. So then, in that case, then we will refer this committee to the Education and Culture Committee on the basis then that it makes sense to have it considered along with PE 1487. The next current petition is PE 1501 by Stuart Graham on public inquiries into self-inflicted and accidental deaths following suspicious death investigation. Members have a note by the clerk and the submissions. Can I note that the Law Society of Scotland submitted a late submission, and the Stuart Graham is in the gallery and could also welcome Willie Rennie and Alex Riley, who I know have an interest in supporting this individual petition. Can I ask for thoughts and comments and contributions from members? I think there is a sensible suggestion that we invite a panel of witnesses to discuss the general issues raised in the petition. For example, the ways in which families could be more involved and given access to information. And clearly it would be sensible to invite the Crown Office and the PF Service, the Law Society of Scotland, Victim Support and Police Scotland. I'm sure members will have others as well. Can I ask members' views on that? That's right. John Wilson?
Convener, given that we're going to have a round table or a panel of witnesses to discuss this issue, I think it would be relevant to invite the Scottish Government along to be represented at that discussion rather than just the Crown Office, the Law Society. Because I think the Scottish Government would hopefully be the body that would take forward any recommendations that this committee would make. So I would want the Scottish Government to be present.
Yeah, and whether it's a Cabinet Secretary or a senior official, that would be a matter of the Scottish Government.
A Minister or Cabinet Secretary.
Yes. Okay. Jackson Carroll?
Like other colleagues, I too have a constituents who I think would have benefited from the aims underpinning this particular petition, and in seeking to pursue matters on their behalf as an elected representative, I have found the defence of the existing practice to be quite robust. I certainly would support the suggestion that we have a panel, but in the first instance, I think we should be prepared, if we are sympathetic to some of the views that emerge as a result of that panel to be ourselves prepared to be quite robust in the way that we then pursue matters. We have already, I think, in this committee found that when we seek to challenge the status quo within the legal establishment, it isn't always met with the appreciation that we would have anticipated.
For that coded language, Mr. Carlow. Are members then agreeable with that course of events? So we're going to have a panel, and we're going to include Scottish Government, as a point John Wilson made. Are members happy with the panel and the individuals and organisations who are represented? Right. Thank you for that. And can I thank Mr Graham for the first petition? As you can see, we're actively considering this, and thank both the elected members for appearing here today. Could I then go to the final current petition, is PE 1502 by Shona Gibbon on saving a curia cost cars. Members have a note by the clerk and submissions. Could I suggest that the committee close the petition under Rule 15.7 on the basis that the collection has been sold and that the National Museum of Scotland and the Scottish Government have outlined the reasons why an attempt was not made to purchase it? And ask for views from members whether that's disagreed. John Wilson.
Convener, given I was the member that asked for further information from the Scottish Government and the National Museums of Scotland, can I say that I welcome, well, I appreciate the responses that have been given by both the Scottish Government and the National Museums of Scotland. However, in agreeing to close the petition, I do raise my concern that the distinction that is being made by the National Museums of Scotland of what they consider to be culturally significant to Scotland, and the issues about housing, because one of the issues that they raised is not just the cost, the pre-auction valuation that was put on this collection, but also where they would actually store any collection of this nature in the future. And clearly Scotland has a history, and we have many galleries throughout Scotland that were created after collections were either gifted or purchased by the people of Scotland. And I think it is one of these issues that I think National Museums of Scotland, put this on the record, have to be aware where there is cultural significance to an item that's significant to Scotland, then they should make every effort to acquire those items for the people of Scotland. So, but as I said, it was useful to get those responses from the Scottish Government and National Museums.
Do you wish any action from that comment, Mr Wilson? Just to like it on the record. Yep. Right, thank you. Are members, do members have any additional comments? Are members agreeable with the fact that we're going to close the petition? Is that agreeable? Thank you. So we'll note Mr Wilson's comments and formally close the petition under Rule 15.7. And can I formally close the meeting and ask members if you could stay behind just for one quick couple of items. Is it closed?